first question is like seeing your participation in the Shanghai International Film Festival and now with many new directors from China, and has the film and TV environment in China improved compared to before?
I think the last 10 years, there was a huge evolution. I mean, starting around 2010, 2012. Before that, Chinese film industry was mainly insular. But from 2012, they started doing a lot of co-productions, like with the US and many other countries, European countries as well. It really opened up at that time and it became much more industrialized, modernized. But then around 2019, things started shutting down again, unfortunately, because of the trade war with the US. Most of the investment of Chinese companies into American ones was blocked. So a lot of collaboration stopped at that time. And then after 2019, the COVID hit, and then China closed its borders. So film, you need people to come in and out to collaborate. It's a teamwork. And so that's really, really slowed everything down since then. It's very hard to do co-productions.
Yeah, the COVID is tough.
On everything, not just our industry, but it's been doubly tough on our industry because for co-productions, it makes it very difficult for foreign teams to come into China or for Chinese team to go overseas. But also for the cinemas, a lot of cinemas in a lot of different cities in China were shut down, for a couple months. And as in Europe, as in the US, it's very difficult to get people back into cinemas. And a lot of investment from film comes from the cinema chains and the distributors. And now that, they've been closed, they've lost a lot of money. They're very cautious to invest in new films. So yeah, that's, also not helping at all.
So my second question is, what made you choose to work with the Chinese team? And what was the opportunity for you to start working with Chinese directors?
Yeah, originally when I started doing film production, I was in France and I was working for a company which had co-produced Jia Zhengke's one of his first films called Platform. Actually, it was maybe his second or third film. But until that time, none of his films had been released in China. And I was with them after they did Platform. I joined afterwards and they had received a script from them and they told me this was a really interesting Chinese team to work with. They had sent me a film script by Han Jie called Walking on the Wild Side. The Chinese name was Lao Xiaozi. It was a small indie film and they were looking for money and I read the script. I liked it a lot. It was on the opening up of China in the 90s and the coal mines and kids of coal mine owners and how they were evolving. I chose China because it was 2005. It was starting to open up in the film sector. And I thought really interesting things would be coming out of China. And a lot of interesting film directors there. So I decided to go to China at that time. And since then I've stayed there because there's always a new project, a new director, something interesting going on in the film industry in China. It's such a big and rich industry, despite the last few years, which have been difficult, but everything that preceded has been extremely rich. So that's what brought me here and has kept me in China. The new opportunities all the time, coming.
Yes, since you mentioned all the interesting part and what attract you to China, but what's the most difficult and challenging part of producing a film or TV production in China?
I think the most difficult part for me, it's not the producing part of actually doing the film. I think it's because that I know how to do well now. And I think Chinese crews are great to work with and always willing to try new things. And there's been a huge growth in the Chinese film industry. I think what's more difficult for me is the whole financing part, which comes before, actually shooting the film. Because basically you're selling air and, or a dream, and you have to get money in exchange of some concept. And there's so many hurdles in between getting the money, doing the film, and then having it released in the cinema and having the investors get their money back. That's investors and more are more and more cautious. Maybe 10 years ago it was easier to get financing, but now it's more difficult, much more difficult than it was a while ago, because also there's fewer releases. The cinemas have been kept closed. So I think it's not the lack of ideas out there. There are so many ideas and really good directors, But it's more the financing which has really dried up. Yeah, and in television, it's getting there's few accesses, only a few platforms to go to, like Tencent, Aichi, Mango, Youku. That's about the four main principal players, and everybody goes to them. So there's a real bottleneck. They have too many projects and not enough slots. So yeah, I'd say that's for me the most challenging issue nowadays.
That's true. It's very true.
Financing, yeah. So and
So
also because China, contrary to Europe, I mean, China's system is more like the American system where they just have private equity or film industry money. In Europe, we have a lot of soft money. That's money in between the private investors or the business money from the cinemas. We have a lot of grants and subsidies, so you can qualify for a lot of these subsidies and get a film project going that way. And China doesn't have that. In Korea, actually, they copied 20 years ago, they copied the French system. I mean, they went and learned from it, and they created a system where the tax money from the film tickets goes back to the film directors and producers. And they implemented a similar system. And now look at the Korean cinema is really booming because they have more stable funding for the directors. And so, but China's still like the US where they don't have that. So it's more of a jungle to get the money. Yeah.
I see. So my last question is, what do you think is the definition of resilience? As a producer with an international perspective who works with many new Chinese directors, it's important to have resilience in the process of filming and production.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting you use this word because it's a word I often use to describe Chinese crews. I think the crews in China are the most resilient I've ever worked with. I mean, Chinese people are resilient. I think you don't break under any stress. It's like I had a director once from Germany who was working with me on a film in China, and he came up with a very nice expression. He was like, "Oh, in China, do as the Chinese do. It's like bamboo; it bends front, back, sideways, but never breaks." And for me, Chinese crews are like that. They bend backwards, forwards. They work many more hours than in other countries, and they never break. They just keep going, and they're super hardworking. And I think for directors also, in producers, I mean, like me, yeah, you have to be resilient in that you just have to keep trying, because if you give up, you're not going to get anywhere in this industry. So it's really a complicated job in terms of getting a project going. And so regardless of what gets thrown at you, you just have to keep the focus and of course, adapt to the situation and change things if they don't fit. But yeah, I think that's the resilience is